Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're looking at a country with vast natural resources, a highly educated population, and literally immense economic potential. We're talking about Argentina. Yet somehow it constantly finds itself trapped in severe financial distress. So let's just dive right in and unpack the timeline, the specific policies, and the resulting political reactions that have culminated in this massive economic mess. 114%. Just let that sink in for a second. 114% annual inflation. This isn't just some textbook statistic or a minor temporary glitch in the system. It's a painful everyday reality for millions of people. Imagine walking into your local grocery store and knowing that the prices of absolute essentials, like milk or bread, are probably going to double over the next year. It completely erodes savings, it destroys purchasing power, and honestly, it makes long-term financial planning practically impossible for the average person. So, here's our roadmap to figure out how things got this bad. 1. An economy in crisis. 2. What is happening now? 3. Why is this happening? 4. The cycle of debt. 5. The political shift. And 6. What are the solutions?
Section 1. An economy in crisis. The baseline. Okay, so the current state of Argentina is basically defined by a trifecta of extreme financial distress. First, you've got rampant inflation making the local currency nearly unusable for storing any real value. Then you have booming black markets, simply because citizens are desperately seeking stable foreign currency. And on top of all of that, you have crippling debt that's actively pushing international lending to its absolute breaking point. Actually, this isn't even just a domestic issue anymore. Argentina owes tens of billions of dollars to the International Monetary Fund. So we're looking at a crisis with major global financial implications.
Section 2. What is happening now? The symptoms. Right now, there's this really fascinating split reality when it comes to Argentina's currency. See, the government artificially sets an official exchange rate, right? And that makes the peso look way stronger than it actually is. But everyday people? They know the truth. They experience the peso losing value literally daily. Because of this, an entirely separate unofficial exchange market, often called the blue dollar, has absolutely exploded. This parallel black market economy is where the actual true value of the currency is dictated by immense public demand for stable US dollars. Section 3. Why is this happening? Diagnosing the disease. An economy doesn't just spontaneously generate 114% inflation and massive black markets out of thin air. No way. This mess is the direct result of a vicious, remarkably consistent structural cycle. It's like a giant line of dominoes where one bad policy triggers the next. Step 1, the state overspends. Step 2, they print cash to cover the gap. Step 3, they borrow money when that cash loses value. And finally, Step 4, they lock down the economy with trade controls to prevent total collapse. Let's zoom in on the very first step in that chain reaction: chronic overspending. For decades now, the Argentine government has consistently spent far more on public services, subsidies, and government payrolls than it actually collects in taxes. Now look, providing for citizens is the goal of any government, right? But consistently running a massive deficit creates a mathematical impossibility. It's a bill that eventually has to be paid somehow. Section 4. The cycle of debt, printing and borrowing. And here is where the cycle gets incredibly destructive. Because the government can't just endlessly raise taxes to cover all that massive overspending, they tell the central bank to simply print more money. Just fire up the printers. But, well, here's a basic rule of economics. When you dramatically increase the supply of money without a corresponding increase in actual economic value, every single bill in your wallet becomes worth less. That money printing directly inflates prices to that shocking 114% we talked about earlier. And when the money loses its value and the local economy stalls out, the country is then forced into crippling borrowing on the international stage just to keep the lights on. So, what's the final mechanism to try and manage this bleeding? Trade controls. As a final, desperate reaction to this cycle of debt and devaluation, the government locks things down. They impose strict trade controls to try and manipulate the flow of goods and money. They heavily tax exports and severely restrict citizens from legally buying foreign currency. The goal is to trap US dollars inside the country. But as we already saw with the booming black market, these controls usually just strangle the legal economy and push citizens to find workarounds, which stifles economic growth even further. Section 5. The political shift. A move to the populist right. You simply cannot separate the economy from politics. The sheer, exhausting pain of a 114% inflation is the direct catalyst pushing desperate voters toward the populist right. When the establishment policies of the past several decades result in a destroyed currency and rampant poverty, everyday voters become completely disillusioned. It makes sense, right? They start looking for outsiders, people who promise to completely tear down the very establishment that created the crisis in the first place. At the very center of this political shift is libertarianism. Broadly speaking, this is a political philosophy advocating for minimal state intervention in both the free market and private lives. And this is the exact philosophy championed by Javier Milei, a total political outsider who became the frontrunner to be Argentina's next president. His dramatic rise is a direct, opposing reaction to the heavy state intervention and chronic overspending that has defined the country for decades. Milei is a deeply polarizing figure, and he's advocating for radical economic shock therapy. He represents a complete rejection of the previous system. He doesn't just want to make minor tweaks to the budget. He wants to take a chainsaw to the state apparatus, drastically reducing government ministries and entirely removing the state's ability to manipulate the economy. And actually, he made that metaphor quite literal by revving a real chainsaw at his campaign rallies. For his supporters, he's the necessary antidote to a poisoned system. But for his detractors, his extreme measures threaten to completely dismantle vital social safety nets and democratic norms. Section 6. What are the solutions? Experimental treatments. So, what's the most drastic element of this proposed shock therapy plan? It's dollarization. This is the process where a country officially throws away its own currency entirely and adopts the US dollar as its legal tender. The absolutely crucial point here is that by doing this, you completely eliminate the government's ability to print money. If Argentina doesn't control the US dollar, their central bank can no longer just print cash to cover their overspending. It forcefully cuts the engine of inflation. But, and it's a big but, it also means surrendering complete control of your monetary policy to the United States Federal Reserve. That makes it a highly controversial and largely untested experiment for an economy of Argentina's massive size. So we're really looking at a historic crossroads here. On one side, you have the status quo. It's a system that provides a massive state apparatus and social subsidies, but pays for it through the invisible, crushing tax of 140% inflation. On the other side, you have shock therapy. Minimal government, zero printing, and complete dollarization. It might finally cure the inflation disease, but it could also trigger massive short-term pain, unemployment, and social unrest in the process. It is a profoundly difficult choice. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this provocative question to think about. Can radical economic shock therapy finally break Argentina's decades-long vicious cycle? Or will the cure ultimately prove to be just as painful as the disease itself? The answer to that question won't just determine the future of Argentina, it's going to serve as a fascinating economic case study for the entire world. Thanks for joining me to explore this, and keep questioning the data.